Hello, I'm Glenn Ahrens, Oregon State University Extension Forester for Clackamas County. I'm talking today about the Hopkins Demonstration Forest results, a project focusing on the Unevenaged Management Demonstration Area and the results of 20 years of work there. First, I want to acknowledge my collaborators, Peter Matska, Hopkins Forest Educator, and Jen Gorski, our Forestry Education Program Assistant. We all work for OSU Extension Forestry and Natural Resources in Clackamas County. The Hopkins Demonstration Forest Results Project is funded by Clackamas County Innovative Fund Program. It's two parts to this project: the Unevenaged Management Demonstration Area, characterizing the outcomes after 20 years of selective harvest silviculture, and part two is looking at the riparian forest demonstration area at Hopkins and revisiting that with some ideas for the future. I'm going to talk about the Unevenaged Management Demonstration Area. Jen Gorski will provide another presentation about the riparian demonstration area. Unevenaged management is a system where we try to create and maintain multiple age classes and sizes of trees all in the same stand or the same acre. Contrast with even age systems where there's a clearing and a patch of trees, a cohort comes up more or less the same age, and we manage that as an even age stand of trees. Even-age management is predominant with Douglas fir. Requires a lot of sunlight to grow. It's efficient and simple, and it does well in Western Oregon. Uneven age management systems trying to convert either an even age stand or to establish uneven age stands, usually characterized by at least 3 age classes, and that's our target and kind of a minimum for a multi-age stand. Uneven age management, or selective harvesting as the tool to create an uneven age system, is very appealing to family forest owners. It allows you to maintain continuous forest cover using selective harvesting, a more diverse and mixed forest type on a smaller area. It has good aesthetic value, provides wildlife habitat and diversity within a small area rather than across a large landscape. And certainly for a woodland owner with a smaller acreage, that's nice to do. Also gives you more frequent income from periodic harvest instead of waiting 40 to 60 years in between even-aged harvests in a system like that. Non-timber objectives are diverse and varied and can be achieved with multiple ages in a forest. And for many woodland owners, they have other priorities besides timber production, the reasons that they own their forest. With the importance of this kind of partial cutting or uneven age management system, more than 20 years ago, Mike Bondi, OSU Extension Forester then and co-founder of Hopkins Forest, Mike working with Bill Emmingham, our silviculture extension specialist, in 1994 they were looking at learning more about uneven age management and doing a demonstration area, and there was a nice patch of that potential demonstration area down at the bottom of Hopkins Forest. They worked with a committee of about 10 local woodland owners and designed the uneven age management demonstration area. And our job now is to take a look at what's happened over the 20 years since then and take stock of what we've learned, share what we've learned, and characterize some of the important outcomes and the costs and the benefits. Particularly want to share in educational materials such as this slideshow, preparing publications, and very valuable field workshops to share and discuss results in the field. The Uneven Age Management Demonstration Area at Hopkins is one of dozens of demonstration areas. This one is a larger one, about 16 acres at the bottom southeast corner, and I invite you to visit it. Go to Hopkins Forest and go to the end of Grouse Hollow Road and hike the trails, and you can see for yourself. For the project, a big part of it was to hire a crew leader, and we found Jackson Chandler and hired him for the summer of 2016. First part of Jackson's job was to work with me and others to compile and summarize the past data. What do we know? What do we need to know to design the new data collection in the future? Part of that, he interviewed others that were involved in the project over the decades, particularly Mike Bondi and Ken Everett, and also volunteers such as Gilbert Shibley. Once we had that in mind, it took to the field, and a big part of Jackson's crew was working with the teachers in the woods Peter Matska coordinated 8 teachers coming out for 1 to 2 weeks each to learn by doing at Hopkins, including data collection with Jackson. And they were also getting credit for their career technical education training. An important historical document was Mike Bondi's paper on unevenaged management. Can it really work? His answer was yes, but there are still many questions and considerations. More open forest conditions are needed, we know that, to keep the understory trees going, but what range of residual density is going to be right? Starting with the idea of about 80 to 100 square feet of basal area per acre as a maximum. How frequently are harvest entries needed to maintain it and to keep the openings going and new regeneration coming? 10 years was a starting point. We know it's going to require close monitoring and adjustments based on what we learned as we go. We call that adaptive management. And so in 1994, the adaptive management process began to convert a natural second growth stand to a multi-age forest. A key part of that process is in establishing more smaller trees and increasing their frequency in the size classes. How did we do? Looking at the changes from 1997 to 2016, at first glance it looks like we did pretty well. We started to open up gaps, reducing the amount of older, larger trees and increasing recruitment of younger trees in smaller size classes. But if you look closer at the species composition, we had mostly Douglas fir and some western red cedar in 1997, but by 2016 we had mostly big leaf maple in some of the smaller size classes. Even though we reduced the amount of larger, older Douglas fir, we're not getting enough conifer in the younger size classes. Looking at the stand, how it looks in the woods, you can see the older Douglas fir and the understory diversifying with smaller trees and shrubs. There's a great deal of diversity across the unevenaged management area. Some areas where cedar predominates, others where it's Douglas fir, and of course we're opening it up as we go. It really stands out in the snow. You can see the different types of canopy layers and the different sizes of trees. But one of the realities with small gaps in western Oregon, shade-tolerant trees such as western red cedar and big leaf maple will do better than Douglas fir that does not tolerate the shade. So we can expect to see an increasing component of both of those species, western red cedar and big leaf maple. And indeed, looking at the data, starting in 1994, Douglas fir was about 90%. By 2005 here, it was 85%, with increasing in the red cedar. By 2016, red cedar is almost 20% and Douglas fir is less than 80%. Also note that the total basal area is still higher than our maximum suggested residual level. We were aiming for 80 to 100 square feet at the most and reducing below that, and we're still above that in the 2016 inventory. A good way to look at the big picture with the treatments at Hopkins, looking at the timeline in the mid-90s, the early treatments to convert from even age to multi-age in both group selection and individual tree areas with a lot of tree planting and removal of larger trees. And then in 2012, an even heavier removal to continue to open the stand in an attempt to get more daylight and reach that basal area target of closer to 100 square feet of basal area. Key thing to look at here is the overall standing volume. At the beginning in 1991, when Hopkins was established, estimated a volume from the timber crews about 312,000 board feet, and 2016 another independent timber crews about the same amount, 313,000 was the estimate. So looking over the 25-year period, you can see we removed about 330,000 board feet, which is an average of about 800 board feet per acre per year. It was a sustainable harvest given that we didn't reduce the standing volume, and so that's a reasonable amount on that type of soil and site. Over that same time period, almost 7,000 trees have been planted, and looking at 2016, the results of Jackson's work, we find about 150 trees per acre in the seedling category and about 40 trees per acre in the sapling category. So many of those trees are surviving, and they're occupying the different gaps in understory, as we would hope. But how are those trees doing? If you look at their growth rate, The saplings in 2015 grew about a foot a year, a little bit more. The seedlings closer to almost half that. The saplings actually had been increasing over the last 3 years after that 2012 harvest that opened up some space, whereas the seedlings are not increasing, still apparently struggling a bit in the understory. To put that in perspective, if you look at a typical fairly open-grown Douglas fir seedling, sapling, 2 to 3 feet a year is pretty common height growth, as you see on the left, and a tree that's suppressed or not getting enough daylight, more like 6 inches, such as the one on the right. The ones in our study at Hopkins are looking like they're about in the middle, perhaps growing to about half what you'd expect in an open environment. Of course, one of the reasons for that is the great increase in the brush and other vegetation in the gaps and openings created. And if you look at our data on vegetation cover, getting towards 70% shrub cover, low shrub and tall shrubs 30 to 40%, also a lot of other herbaceous species. So it's clear that the understory seedlings are working with a lot of competition. In some cases fairly severe from blackberry, but also many of the native understory shrubs are responding as you expect. Fine maple and big leaf maple and hazel, of course, are also pretty important and much larger dominant tall shrubs or trees. A key aspect of uneven age management compared to even age management is that we'd expect higher costs because of the increased complexity and difficulty and the care needed with uneven age or selective management. And also we might expect lower economic returns with those costs, as well as perhaps reduced timber production as you're giving up more growing space to non-timber vegetation in the understory. At Hopkins, it looks like our logging costs in comparison to a clear-cut harvest at Hopkins, about 8% higher for our selective harvest. Our timber production rate is surprisingly good so far. What we've experienced, that 800 board feet per acre per year, is what you might expect under the soil and site conditions. A key aspect of selective harvesting and uneven age management is preventing damage to the residual trees. And at Hopkins, the results show that we did have some fairly significant damage. Overall, close to 10% of the trees had major damage either to the stem or to the crown. And damage to the stem can lead to the introduction of decay and rot and breakage, as well as damage to soil and roots are of concern. Damage to the crown, of course, reduces the tree's photosynthetic ability and might make it more vulnerable. Overall, to summarize, timber production and periodic revenue can be maintained at a good level at Hopkins in our experience. Maintaining the larger openings is still a key challenge and is needed if we want to sustain the Douglas fir component. Group selection or heavier thinning may be needed, and key decision is going forward, how much do we want to continue shifting towards western red cedar and what level should we leave in the overstory canopy that controls that understory light. Along with the overstory opening, then, of course, we are getting more brush, and better brush control is needed if we want our younger trees to do better. And clearly, big leaf maple will take over the understory if we don't do something, and so more control of maple is needed to keep it down. Cumulative effects of logging damage are serious, and we must do better in the future to prevent degradation. Costs are somewhat higher, perhaps 8 to 10%. Productivity is looking good. Non-timber benefits are obvious. You should go take a walk and visit the Hopkins Demonstration Forest, the Uneven Age Management Area, and see for yourself what you think of that. So those values are high, but they are hard to quantify. Thank you for listening, and if you have questions, feel free to send me an email, and please visit Hopkins Demonstration Forest.